After so many years of writing, I still think of story creation as a mysterious and unexplainable act. You sit down to write, and where do the stories come from, right? Well, this is part two of my plotting videos that I'm making. Last week, I spoke about why we want to plot. What is the purpose of plotting? And today I'm going to talk about putting everything together, putting your ideas together, creating those plot points that you need in order to create a complete story.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we are just meeting, I am Julia Amante and I'm a women's fiction author. So let's talk today then. So again, last week I spoke about the function of plotting. Why do we want to plot? And today I want to look at it a little bit more specifically. I'll go into detail a little bit more. Plotting provides the structure. It gives us the framework so that we can build our story. And in a way, plot points will just appear just the way that your original idea did. But we do have to spend a little more time to actually think about this and create our story. So I'd like to talk about the building blocks of our story structure. So the first one is character. So we have to understand our character, who the character is, what goal your character has in the story, what does the character want, and how will he achieve that goal. And we also want to know what's going to keep your character from reaching his goal, what obstacles are going to be in his way, and what events are going to happen that are going to help this character to transform into the new person that actually can reach his goals. That second building block is actually that goal. So what is the goal that the character is fighting for? Readers want to read about a character who is fighting for something, who is doing something in order to reach the goal that he needs really to survive, in order to become the person he needs to become, in order not to die, right? This character needs to reach a certain goal, and readers want to see your character doing that. So that's super important. We need a character, we need a goal for the story and for the character. And lastly, we need a reader goal. So yes, the reader has a goal also. And the reader's goal is to learn something from your book. The reader wants to understand himself better through your character's journey. And it could be something as simple as how to learn how to trust. So through watching your character go through the journey of learning how to trust, then your reader will learn that as well. So think of books or think of movies that you've watched, right? What is it that you have learned from some of the movies that you've watched or some of the books that you've read? Maybe it's how not to turn into your father. Maybe it's how to deal with mean girls. Maybe it is how to escape the mob or bad influence. So there's a number of things that when we read a story, even if it's a simple story, we come to understand how to do something as ourselves, as a reader or as an audience, and how to apply that to our own life. And so the reader says, well, let me see how this character did it, and then maybe I can do it the same way. And that is why the reader will continue to read your book to find out how the story ends and what happens. So does this mean that you have to write a scene by scene outline? You definitely can if you want to, if you already know the various scenes that may come up in your story. But most of us don't. Most of us don't know every scene before we write it, but we do know certain things about our story. We do know definitely how it's going to start. We may know how it's going to end. We may know what the climax is going to be in the middle. We may know some other parts of the story, and we want to put those in there. So those are going to be the plot points that you write down. This is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to progress through the story. And sometimes there are scenes that at least I think about that I don't really know why I want this scene in there yet. I just think this would be a cool scene, and I will put that in there. And then later on, as the book is writing itself, or as I'm writing my book, that scene may become relevant to me. I may understand, like, oh, I know why I wanted this scene here, or why I liked this. And again, sometimes these scenes come to you. You just have this image of your character doing a certain thing, and put that in there wherever you think it may fit. And then later on, you can see if it really does. See if it's something that sounds cool, or maybe it was just something that you thought of that, well, this would have been kind of a cool thing for my character to do, but really it doesn't fit in my story, and I'm just going to pull it out. So let's remind ourselves then of the structure of a story, right? So it's going to have 3 acts. At least most of the plotting or most of the structures that you see out for plotting, for writing books, for writing movies, is 3 acts. They're going to have 3 acts. The first act is how your story opens. It's the beginning of your book. It's when you're going to introduce your characters. You're going to introduce the story goal. You're going to introduce the character goal. You're going to introduce what could possibly be the conflict of the story. What's going to keep your character from reaching his goal. So that's your first act. It's usually 10 to 15% of your novel. It's the very beginning. Then there is Act 2, which is the bulk of your story. Some people even break up Act 2 into Act 2 Part 1, Act 2 Part 2. But it's the center of your story. It's everything that's going to happen to your character, the friends they're going to meet, the enemies they're going to meet, the challenges they're going to face, the enemies that are going to try to keep your character from progressing through the story. A lot well, most of the story is happening here. This is where the character is changing. This is where the character is experiencing things that are going to, again, keep him from getting his goal. And it's also going to test him and develop the character of the character, right? It's going to develop your character into a new person. His failures are going to change him into the new person that he needs to be in order to achieve his goal. So the character, remember, the character, the way he starts at the beginning of your story, cannot reach his goal, because he has to go through the many tests and challenges that you're going to put him through in order to get his goal. So even if it's like, okay, this character needs to find love, by the end of the story, this character is going to find the love of his life. Okay, well, at the beginning, he cannot find his love of his life because he doesn't have the love of his life in his life. Why? Because there are certain things that are keeping him from that. Maybe there are some character flaws that he has. Maybe he doesn't value the things that he should value. So whatever is keeping him, this is what you have to decide, right? Through your plot. Like, what is it that this character needs in order to achieve his goal? And then how is he going to get those things? And that's what you start creating those plot points in the middle of your story. And then there's Act 3. Act 3, of course, is the last part of your book, your last 10-15% of your book, where you're going to show exactly how your character reaches his goal, what happens at the end, what are the final challenges that he has to overcome in order to reach his goal. And then what is it? Does he get the goal that he originally started off wanting? Okay, so sometimes characters do and sometimes they don't. So sometimes they get exactly what they wanted because they've earned it, they've gone through all the things, they get the prize at the end. But sometimes they don't get the goal that they wanted, they get the goal that they needed. So they thought they wanted a certain thing, but after going through the entire story, Act 2 of your book, the character has come to understand that that really wasn't what he wanted. He really thought he wanted the love of his life, but really what he wanted was to find happiness, security, something else, right? So it wasn't just a person or just falling in love that he wanted, but he wanted someone who was there for him, that would be there in the hard times, that wasn't perfect, that was all kinds of stuff. So maybe during the middle of the book, the ideal woman that he thought he wanted isn't the ideal woman he thought he wanted. Maybe it's this other woman who was not ideal, but that helped him through some difficult things. And, you see these kind of stories a lot, right? I thought I wanted this woman, but really it was my best friend that I wanted all along, right? So he gets his goal, but he doesn't get the goal the way he thought he was going to get it. Well, that happens at the last part of your book, the last 10-15% of your book. Okay, and then you've heard right before that you might have heard this, so the 3-act structure, adding plot points, but then how do you do that? Well, there's no magic. You have to start thinking, okay, what can happen? What needs to happen? Just as I've been talking about this, right? So I'm not writing a story, but as I'm talking about it, I'm thinking, what does this character need? How do we get this? What can we give them? What challenges can we give them? And what I recommend you do is to start writing a long list. So as you think of this, this could happen to the character, write it down. Okay, he needs to be tested in this certain way. He's very arrogant. Maybe, he can't get the love of his life because he's very arrogant. Okay, well, he needs to be challenged and we need to make him a little more humble. Well, how can we do that? What scenes can we write? Write down those. So you're going to make a long list and say, okay, well, let's see, this belongs in Act 1, this belongs in Act 2, this belongs in Act 3. So you start to see, you start to build, these are your building blocks, right? You start to see how you are structuring the story, how it's going to look. You will probably come up with other plot points and other ideas as you start writing, but at least you have these sets. Maybe you end up with 20 or 25 or whatever points, and at least you have a structure. It's like, okay, I know these things are going to happen. In between these, I'm not sure yet, but I'm sure as I'm working between plot point 5 and plot point 6, I need to get from 5 to 6, something will come up. I will figure out what needs to happen to get from 5 to 6 as I'm writing. So again, I'm not a huge plotter, but I do plot just these main points or the things that I think I want in there. And the rest of it, I just let it develop as I'm writing the story. The reason that personally I'm happy just to have a scaffold of the story, so just some plot points, is first of all, I love to figure out what happens as I'm writing. But also what I really like is that doing this gives me sort of a bird's eye view of my story. I can see what is going to happen. I can see the ups and downs of the story. I can see where the character is going to need more of a challenge or what's going to happen. That's why personally I just like having some of these major points in my story and not trying to figure out everything before I write it. So which plot points then do I make sure that I have? Well, I obviously want the beginning. I want that inciting incident, what's going to lead my character into the story, what's going to happen. There's got to be something at the very beginning that is going to launch my character into this adventure that he's going to have. So that one I want to figure out at the very beginning. Why is he even going to go on this journey? There has to be something. So I will figure out that first plot point. Then there is the whole middle, right? The whole center, the midpoint, but I want the central midpoint. That's the climax of the story, the midpoint of the story, really. The climax is within that midpoint. The midpoint of your story is a place where the character's goals may change. There may be some kind of revelation that comes out. There may be a shift in the stakes. There's something that is going to change your character. He's either going to become even more entrenched in getting his goal, or he's going to change his goal or alter his goal a little bit. James Scott Bell, I've mentioned him many times before on different videos, has a book where he talks about how the midpoint is super important, because it's a place where your character is going to, his eyes are going to open. He's going to actually see himself. Bell calls it the mirror moment, where he's looking in the mirror and seeing himself for the first time. He doesn't literally have to have a mirror, but sometimes they do. And so this is the moment where the character realizes, like, wow, this is, how have I changed in my life, or how did I get to where I'm at today? He actually sees himself for who he has been and wants to change. So up until this point, maybe he's had to change. Something has pushed him into this journey and he's felt like, oh, I have to do this, but I don't really want to. But at this point in the middle, he realizes, no, I not only need to change, but I actually want to, because I don't want to be this person anymore that I was in the past. And if you sit and watch this, and I actually did do this, is sit down and watch some of the movies that you like and go right to the middle, sometimes a little before, sometimes a little after, but right in the middle, and see what's happening to the characters and how they are seeing themselves, how that mirror moment is being reflected. One of the movies that I like and that I've seen, and I did this just recently, just went to the middle, is My Best Friend's Wedding with Julia Roberts and Demi Mulroney, I think his name is. Super cute guy, but has a hard name. Okay. So there's a moment in this whole story. So if you haven't watched this, it's old, so almost everybody has watched it that wants to. But if you haven't, she has her best friend. She finds out her best friend is going to get married. She decides to fly to wherever he's at. I think Chicago, and going to destroy his wedding because she decides she loves him. She doesn't want him to marry somebody else. And so she goes, and it's romantic comedy. All kinds of silly things happen as she tries to break up him and his girlfriend. But there's a point in the middle of the story where she invites another friend to come and pretend to be like her boyfriend to try to make her best friend jealous. She sort of succeeds. He sort of is thinking like, wow, I'm kind of jealous. And they decide to spend the day together, and they're going down the river and under a bridge, and they're talking about this. Like, he's mostly doing all the talking, saying, how things are going to change between them and all this stuff. And there's a point right in the midpoint where he says, like, well, if people love each other, they should just say it. They should just come out and say that they love each other. And I love this because it's so visual. It goes, they're going through the river, they go under a bridge right before he says this. As they're under the bridge, so before they're in the light, now they're in this darkness, and they're both sort of waiting for each other. Like, yeah, if somebody loves each other, they should just say it. They should say they love each other. And she's kind of waiting for him to say it, and he's kind of waiting for her to say it. And they go into the bridge. You move into the second half of the movie, of the book. And when they come, of the movie, I don't think it was a book. Maybe it was. I don't know. But it goes under, and nobody said anything. And they both realize the moment is gone. They didn't say it. They don't really feel that love. They love each other because they're friends, but they're not in love with each other. And I thought that was such a perfect example of that midpoint where now Julia Roberts, whatever her name is in the story, but I can't remember what her name is, but she has now got to alter her goal because she realizes that, she had that opportunity. She didn't take it. Why didn't she take it? She doesn't love him that way. And there's even right after that a really sweet moment where they sit and they dance together and they're holding each other, and she gets tears in her eyes. And why does she get tears in her eyes? Because she realizes that it's never going to be the two of them, that it's never going to happen, right? So she's letting that goal go. So create that scene, create that midpoint. What is that midpoint of your story? What is that moment of no return where the character is going to make a decision towards the goal one way or another? That we're moving forward, we're changing it, we're doing something. What's going to happen there? You have to have that scene. So create that before you start writing your story. Okay, the next point that you want to think about is the climax. And so again, sometimes it's similar too. So sometimes it is right in the midpoint. Sometimes it's a separate, comes a little bit after the midpoint. And usually it's a plot point of conflict. There's some kind of conflict. There's some kind of danger where it looks like the hero is not going to achieve his aim, and so it's a little dangerous, right? It looks like the character is going to die for some reason, or something, or the goal is going to die. Something's going to happen. So you have that climactic scene. So again, it could be in the midpoint. It could be that same scene that we just talked about, or it could be a separate scene that is also right around the middle, but it's a little after that. So maybe I would say like 65-75% of your book. And then lastly, of course, you're going to have the resolution. How is this going to end? So you have to have that, right? So we have those 4 major plot points that you're going to want to have at least before you start writing. And then you can have the extra ones that we talked about. There are 2 other plot points that you may choose to have also. So not only just those 4 main ones, but Scott Bell talks about what he calls doorways, and their transition scenes going from Act 1 to Act 2, from Act 2 to Act 3. So you have doorway number 1 and doorway number 2. And what does he mean by that? Okay, so an example of this, people always use Star Wars because Star Wars is one of these classic movies that follows this structure very well. So that doorway number 1 between Act 1 and Act 2 in Star Wars would be when Luke comes back home and he finds his family dead. It's a transition point from that ordinary world into this second act where the hero is going to go on this adventure whether he wants to or not, because he can't go back at this point. His family is dead, everybody in his town is dead and destroyed, and he has to take off and go and join the resistance and fight. Now the second doorway is between Act 2 and Act 3. And to quote Bell, he says that to move from the middle to the end, the second doorway of no return, something has to happen to set up the final confrontation. Usually it's some major clue or a piece of information or a huge setback or crisis that hurdles the action towards the conclusion. So sometimes, again, doorway number 2 can be, to me, that climactic moment, right? So we've had that middle moment, that mirror moment, and then a little bit later we have that climax where that big conflict happens. That could be doorway number 2, where that thrusts us into the end of the story, into that last act. So if after doorway number 1 the character can't go back to his ordinary life, definitely after doorway number 2 there's no way to go back to being who he was. He's changed too much. He's gone through too many things in order to become this new person, and so he's really thrust into the end of this story. He has to push through to that goal now. So if you're curious about James Scott Bell's book and which one it is, he actually mentions it in a few of his books, but the one that I have, actually I think I have all of them, but the one that I'm referencing is called Plot and Structure. And again, the author is James Scott Bell. Definitely worth reading if you have questions about plotting. So just to recap, you don't have to plot every single scene. You don't have to plot your whole book, but you should plot certain scenes, these key moments in the story, because it's really hard to move forward if you don't know. Like I used to when I first started writing, it's like I have this story to write about this, and I want the character to be this person, and I want this character to reach this end, right? So I wasn't even completely clear on how the end would actually happen. I mean, I didn't know how the end would happen because I wasn't plotting. I was just writing, and I, instinctively was able to get to the end, and it was interesting somewhat, but there were a lot of places where I was going off track, or that it just wasn't hitting emotionally the way it should have. And so just adding these key moments helped me a lot as a writer to plot a little bit and to still have the freedom to be able to develop the story as I want it to. So it's important because it gives you, the writer, a sense of progression and a sense of development with your story. So I encourage you to create these strategic plot points before you start writing. It'll give you, again, a more structured narrative. It'll give you a sense of the flow, and it'll really kind of get you excited to write the story, but it'll also give you the freedom to be a little more creative and to watch the story develop as you're writing. So I hope this helps. If it is helpful, please share this video with other people and hit the like button and hit the subscribe button so that you will be notified the next time that my video goes up. Thank you. See you next week.